Good evening and welcome to the October 22nd City Council work session. And do we have counselors calling in, or as far as we know, they're both? Okay, so we'll expect to see them both. So our first item of business is just to talk about committee reports and items of interest. Do I have counselors who need? Counselor Servat, CS, Emily, okay, Chris. Okay, take Betty, got it. Go for it, Claire.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so two items of interest. One, I represented, last week I traveled to Silverton, to the Oregon Gardens, to represent the Lane Area Commission on Transportation, of which I serve as vice chair. Mayor Henry of Florence was unable to attend, so I went in his place, and this was a meeting of the Oregon Transportation Commission and the director of ODOT, and it was an opportunity for all the area commissions on transportation from around the state to come together to give feedback to the Oregon Transportation Commission. They do this once a year. And in this case, in light of the various changes that happened with the transportation funding that went through in the last legislative session, it's kind of changed the acts, the focus of the acts. And so this was an opportunity to bring our Lane Acts voice to the table, and the main thing that we communicated was that local jurisdictions really understand what their needs are the best in terms of transportation infrastructure and projects, and really encouraged the Oregon Transportation Commission and ODOT to think about how we can move back towards a place where it's the local folks who are prioritizing our local projects and deciding what our local needs are in coordination with each other throughout Lane County, which is something our act has done very well in past years. So there was some good feedback from them as well in terms of looking at those processes and how we can keep more local input in decision-making in terms of transportation projects and funding. And then the second thing is that after a public forum this evening, I plan to introduce a resolution, ask council to take action supporting a resolution opposing Measure 105, which is the measure that would repeal our decades-old sanctuary state law. And so I will speak to that at our 7:30 meeting after public forum, should I get a second.
Great, thank you very much. Emily, you're on.
Thank you. The new cameras are up downtown, and of course I haven't seen anything that they're showing yet, but one thing they're not showing is a sign, and I'd really like to see you know, posters on them that say, this is a camera, we're watching and listening to you. It only says very small, this is EPD watching and listening to you. So I think it would be a good idea to really label them so that people are aware that they are being filmed. And at night you can't see them at all, so I think making a spiral of Christmas as twinkle lights up the pole would let people see that they're there, so that even at night they also would know that they're being watched. So it'll be interesting to see what their effect is, especially after we can see them. The protest camp has gotten bigger and bigger, as we all know, and I'm very interested in our work session today. But last week, week and a half ago, as it was getting bigger, there were complaints about excrement on buildings, and I asked to get another porta potty down there, because when I asked how many potties are there, there's only one downtown, all of downtown after 5 at Oak and 10th, and that just wasn't sufficient. So the city did bring another porta potty, and it has been, people are just really, really happy. So I hope that we can continue supplying restrooms, and I appreciate all this work. Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you. A couple of things. The Chamber of Commerce had their annual business expo last week. Jennifer and I took the first shift. What impressed me was the number of people who came, because even our shift, which was early, still had a great turnout. And I'm really pleased to see when you have that many businesses networking with each other, which is really kind of the point of it, is local people really supporting and helping and encouraging other local people. We had the city there in a booth. The other governments were there. The airport was there. A number of other public partners were there, which I think really emphasizes the whole public-private partnership. So that worked out really well. And then today, I attended the rededication ceremony for the Richardson Bridge Affordable Housing Project. And what's kind of unique and noteworthy about it is this is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, affordable housing projects in Oregon. And it was the first Eugene land bank project. And we've been doing land banking for decades. So it really is a first in many, many ways. And what's important then, if you're going to have this kind of first that occurs a lot of years ago, is you have to recommit to make sure that it doesn't deteriorate and fall apart. And so with the help of the city of Eugene through some environmental assessments and some SDC waivers and other things, they were able to finance the rehabilitation of the Richardson Bridge, and it looks absolutely great. And they did a ribbon cutting, they put in a new play structure, and they've done some really good stuff. So you don't just build these projects and then walk away. You build them, you serve them for decades, you rebuild them when you need to, and then they continue to soldier on for years to come. And this is a prelude to what is going to be an even bigger project around Yapoa Terrace, which is also the next project that's going to need some major renovation and rehabilitation, and that's a multi-million-dollar project. So get ready for that one, but we've had a great success with Richardson Bridge.
Great. Betty?
Thank you. I'm dismayed that inclusionary zoning no longer even has a date on the calendar. I know you say it's coming with other talk about housing, but it's been a long time. And in the meantime, we have lots of new apartment buildings going up, which could be, if we had inclusionary zoning, it could be applied to those new places. I think it's time that we at least had a discussion and information about what it's possible to do. As soon as the state lifted its ban on inclusionary zoning, Portland passed it. And we haven't done anything yet. So we need information about what we can do and also what Portland has done and how it's working out in Portland. And I see people who don't like it shaking their heads, but I think it's,
There's parts that you can't do legally. I want to talk about it, but there's parts you can't.
I know that.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know more about it. And I'd like the public to know more about it. We're starting to get email about the tax exemption that we granted last week. And people are just hearing about it, which finally in the newspaper. And a big reason why I thought we should wait is so that people would at least know what was happening before we made the decision. Whether we listen to them or not, but at least they should know. And I was thinking about things that might deserve a tax exemption, and in my opinion, a single-room occupancy building would be something that would really be of benefit to the city and might deserve a tax exemption. And another one was I was just reminded of the difficulties of people who would like to annex to the city out in Santa Clara and those areas where we have the patchwork of city, and I've suggested this before, but not a tax exemption, but if we could freeze the taxes of anyone who wants to annex for 10 years, that might encourage more annexation, so that they don't have to immediately start paying city taxes. And 10 years seems like a long time to people. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Thank you, Mary. I like it when the city manager smiles because he knows what I'm going to say. We had a work session on this very subject 4 years ago, Betty, and I agree with you entirely. As I recall, we came to the conclusion in that conversation that such an arrangement at the time seemed to be a reasonable idea for most of those at the table. I hope we will bring that back up and do it again. I agree. I believe that with please correct my numbers if you know them to be wrong, but I believe 22,000 households in River Road and Santa Clara that are county residents.
Yeah, I don't know it.
Something like that is my recollection from our conversation. Those folks live in town. They'd like to vote for the people that make decisions that govern their world. They would like to have police response that's as quick as ours is rather than the county's. A lot of whom rent their place and don't understand why they don't have it. I think it's high time we do what Betty has just suggested. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. I'll just follow up. I know Betty and I have had this conversation many times around inclusionary zoning, but it is among the packet of things that the Housing Tools and Strategies Group will explore, and their next meeting is November 14th, and it's an opportunity to hear community members talk about that. There are 36 people on that committee, and so it is an opportunity for any counselor to sit and hear that conversation. So encourage you to attend. All right, I think we are ready for the first item of business.
Great, and I'll turn over to Denny and his team.
Oh, yes. Oh, and I actually have to close out of the meeting, and so I'm gaveling out of a council meeting and into a downtown urban renewal district.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors. Denny Bro, Planning and Development. Today's work session, we're going to focus on an update on our downtown Riverfront project. We're going to start by telling you a little bit about where we are with the Williams and Dame Riverfront redevelopment project. We want to talk to you a little bit about the affordable housing parcel. We've discussed affordable housing opportunity on the Riverfront site, and that is progressing and expanding potentially, and we want to get some feedback from council. Mark Schoning's going to give an update on where we are on some of our infrastructure work in the local improvement district for the area. I'm going to provide a steam plant update, and then Emily Proudfoot's going to give you an update on where we are with the park, Riverfront Park. There's a couple of motions. One's an urban renewal agency motion regarding the affordable housing parcel 10A as we call it, and then a city council motion related to step 2 of the local improvement district. So just starting with our update on the Williams and Dame progress that we've been making. We've really moved from concept design to actually trying to paper the disposition and development agreement. If you recall, the Urban Renewal Agency Board approved deal points for the disposition of the property to Williams and Dame. And we've really taken those deal points and now putting them into a development agreement, disposition and development agreement. As you can imagine, that's very complex. This is a big project with lots of moving parts. The good news is we're making really good progress. We expect to have that signed in the next few weeks, early next month, hopefully. And we feel like we still have a really good partner. We're making great progress. You know, there's definitely some complications, but I think the progress is very positive. Once that development agreement is signed, we'll move into a due diligence period. And that will really start a number of city and agency actions that are necessary before Williams and Dame is obligated to purchase the property. Several of these include code amendments, MUPD approval, building out the infrastructure throughout the site through the local improvement district, and ultimately budget authorization to do the work. These will all require city council and agency board actions and provide a number of opportunities for public input along the way. And so we wanted to just kind of walk through some of the timing of these due diligence items. I'll just start with the code amendment process. We've talked about potential code amendments associated with the development of the site. And really these have to do with reconfiguring the street layout on the site, reconfiguration of the park design, and the zoning kind of sub-districts that were part of the EWEB master plan and what was codified. When we started to change the layout of the streets, change the park design, meaning, you know, a larger central plaza area, for example, in order to move forward with the current concept design that you've looked at before, we'll need to do some code amendments. We're expected that council would take action on the code amendments likely in June or July of next year after Planning Commission and City Council public hearing. So I'm way ahead. The MUPD process is expected to happen next summer. We would expect that Williams and Dame would submit an application for the multi-unit property tax exemption for the eligible parts of the project. Not the whole project is eligible. It's the rental apartment units that would be on the site. Again, we would expect that next summer. That would trigger a written comment period that begin in, say, July of August of next year. It would include the MUPD review panel, reviewing that application, probably in early fall, and then council would consider their MUPD application in October or November. So generally, about a year from now, we would be looking at their MUPD application. And finally, regarding the infrastructure and the LID process, if council reviews and approves the city engineer's proposed motion later at this work session, significant engineering work would begin and design work, and that would occur over the next year. Construction bids would be received, estimated to be in early 2020, and a public hearing would be held before hearings official related to the local improvement district, followed by city council action to form the local improvement district and authorize the city manager to award a construction contract. And what you see underneath each one of these boxes here is the public involvement that would be part of each one of those due diligence items. The last thing I was going to talk about before I hand it off to Mark is the affordable housing parcel. If you recall, that's the parcel next to the steam plant. We talked about that parcel when we last gave you an update on the Riverfront project. And as a reminder, Lot 10A, as we call it, would be purchased by Williams and Dame. Since that July work session, the last time we were here, that concept is kind of developed further. What is being at least considered is an increase in the number of affordable housing units. So we were talking about 75 units last time we talked about this. There's an opportunity to potentially push that up to 100 units. The provision there would be, though, you'd have to somehow figure out how to accommodate the parking. The site is limited. Right now, at 75 units, they were really talking about embedded, kind of tucked under parking. If you think about the Tate condominiums, Westtown on 8th, the parking is kind of embedded and tucked under the site. And that's what was originally proposed. In order to get the number of units up to 100, there is some consideration about maybe doing a couple of layers of parking and a parking structure, not necessarily underground, but a couple of levels of parking. And that would provide some parkings for the affordable housing units, but potentially some public parking as well. Estimated to be maybe 35 spots that could serve the park, the steam plant, if there's retail in the steam plant. It would require a partnership. We might have to cover some of those costs for the parking. We don't really know how much it's going to cost, or it hasn't been designed yet. What we're really looking for today is direction from the agency board, and basically your interest in pursuing and coming back with more details on that, as far as what would the concept design look like, what's the cost estimate, and what is the potential public investment associated with that. And if we have some interest in continuing that path, there's a motion that we would ask you to give us that would at least keep us on the path of working with them on that concept. If not, we would just go back to the original proposal. So I'm going to hand it off to Mark now, and he's going to give a little update on the infrastructure.
Thanks, Denny. Mayor and Council. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the local improvement district, and you took the first step of initiating that in July of this year. And then your next item is to consider action on the city engineer's report about moving forward. And to date, we've, earlier this fall, we published a request for qualifications and proposals and selected a local consultant, KPFF, to do the design of the infrastructure improvements, which include the street network, the public utilities of water, wastewater, stormwater, and electric, and the private utilities of natural gas and communication. We're currently negotiating that scope of work and fee proposal, and assuming direction later this evening by the council to move forward with that work, then we'll award that consultant contract, and a significant amount of design and engineering will be done over the next 6 months, along with and commensurate with that, a significant amount of a consultant budget will be expended. The 6-year capital improvement program in the fiscal year 20 budget will include the proposed infrastructure costs for the city council to consider later this year as part of the budget process. And the goal is to complete the site preparation work in this next summer, which would include the demolition of 3 buildings, rough grading of the site, and utility relocations. And then the major construction of the roads and the public and private utilities would occur in the summer of 2020. With that, I'll turn it back to Denny.
So the last thing that I wanted to give you an update on is the steam plant. If you recall, in April, the agency board approved a process and criteria to select a developer for redevelopment of the steam plant. And after April, we issued an RFQ, request for qualifications. And in August, the city invited a local team led by Mark Mixis of DChase Mixis and Mark Fromeyer of Arcimoto to prepare a full proposal for redevelopment of the steam plant. And that team is currently assessing the building's potential, bringing in architects, engineers, other experts to kind of begin to explore how it might be used, what are the costs, what is the financing strategy, those kinds of details. We're currently working with the team to develop a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which will really outline expectations for the proposal. It'll cover time details, uses, budget, concept design, what they're asking the city to support, how we could support the project. So this is kind of an outline of the process really quickly. We've issued the RFQ, we've selected the team. We're into the due diligence phase, as we're calling it. The team is expected to do some community outreach as part of their due diligence in cooperation with the city to really talk to the community about what they want to see on the site and the uses that would basically bring them to the river. We'll bring the proposal through the river guides. They were involved in selecting this group, and we'll bring their proposal back through the river guides. We would come back to the agency board with their proposal, and then we would come back again for the agency to review deal points for the actual sale disposition of the property. So we still have a lot of work to do, but we're making progress. So Emily is now going to talk about the Riverfront Park.
Thanks, Denny. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Back in March, we hired Walker Macy Landscape Architects out of Portland, Oregon, and a pretty big team of consultants behind them to help us work on this first phase of design for the downtown Riverfront Park. And in this phase, we are doing a ton of data collection, a lot of geotechnical and engineering, all kinds of information about the site, a pretty extensive public involvement process, and then finally coming up with a concept design, which we would be able to move forward into developing a set of construction documents. As you guys probably know, we held 3 meetings over the summer, and it's probably the most interest I've had in any single park site in my almost 20-year career here at the city. We had over 3,500 people respond to 3 different surveys, and we had over 100 people, sometimes like 150, come to our public meetings. People are very interested in this project. And not only were the numbers impressive, but also when we asked folks where they live in the city, people were responding from all over the community. It wasn't just downtown, it wasn't just specific areas, it was from all over the city. So personally, I was delighted to see that. I think it means that people are really engaging in this process, and there's broad community interest for re-engaging the river in a public park setting. Originally, we started with a 3-acre park site, so the Riverfront Park site that was identified as what EWEB would be selling to the city for $1. And between meetings 1 and 2, we expanded that site by 1 acre. So we added the acre of this plaza, sort of where you see 1, 2, 3 there. Let's see if I can figure out this pointer. Is it working? Oh, there it is. So we added this 1 acre plaza just to the west of this main Riverfront Park, which was originally this 3 acres right along the river. our first meeting was to really re-engage the community on their values around the downtown Riverfront Park. We wanted to find out if people were still had the same values and interests that they expressed in the also very robust process of the Riverfront redevelopment master planning process 8 or 10 years ago. And for the most part, we heard, yes, we want an urban riverfront park in our downtown, but we want it balanced with a good, good amount of green and some really good habitat enhancements along the riverbank. So a balance of open views and closed views, a balance of hard pavement and green and trees and shrubs and riverbank restoration. From there, the team developed 3 different options for folks to weigh in on. And while we didn't ask people necessarily to pick an option, we actually asked them about different features of the park. So what levels of activity do you want to see? And what kind of views do you want to have? And what kind of plaza shape do you want? And how do you want this to feel? And what kind of art would you like to see? And how would you like to see the art, integrated with the site? So we asked a lot of really qualitative questions within the context of 3 individual designs that were pretty unique. Some were more, one was more green, one was a little more urban, one was kind of a mix. And from there, we got pretty clear direction about where to go, and the team came up with this, what I like to call final-ish design, because after we presented this design, we went back out to the public and said, hey, did we hit the mark? And we got a lot of comments, that varied from, gosh, I wish there was less paving, to I wish there were more views, or, it's a huge variety. We ask a lot of open-ended questions, so we get a lot of that qualitative information instead of just, is it a 1-star or 5-star park? So I'll just walk through this design somewhat quickly. So number 1 here, here is, just to orient you, here's the eWeb South headquarters, North headquarters, and the existing eWeb Plaza. Here's the DeFazio Bridge, and then the steam plant down at the south end. This would be the restaurant as it's currently planned. So the park is kind of bookended by these, the main central part of the park is kind of bookended by these 2 sort of commercial hubs. So first part is this entry garden area, so quiet area to sit and have your coffee or chill out, read a book. Number 2, near this drop-off area. Number 2 is a restroom location. That can move anywhere. We're envisioning it as something as simple as a Portland Loo, or potentially down in the road. Maybe we have a retail hub for that use, but we definitely need a restroom at this site. Number 3 is the main, oh my goodness, go back, here we go. Number 3 is the main plaza area. So we really, it's a pretty robust plaza area. We see this as having enough room for market stalls or food carts or any kind of programming that we want to do. We want a programmable, active site. Water feature here. And number 4 is it's sort of an interactive water feature connected with number 4, which is a sort of a medium-sized playground, not huge, but it's at the base of this wonderful mound. So we see this as a really nice area to get up, see out the river views, and then also, we can incorporate some play into that slope. Number 5 is a series of boardwalks. So I think, from the master plan, there was a strong boardwalk component that was part of Restaurant Row. We heard that people were really interested in that materiality. So that's what that is, along with an art pavilion that we envision being an art piece in and of itself, but also then being a performance space for performing arts, exhibits, all kinds of art could happen in this place. There are stormwater swales, so number 7 kind of shows that, along with this bike path, which we very clearly heard from folks that people wanted a distinct separation between bicycle and pedestrian traffic. And so there's, wide space dedicated to bikes, wide space dedicated to pedestrians, and then an independent pedestrian path that goes closer to the river with several of these, meeting up with several of these view corridors that pierce kind of through the development, which was also another big piece of the original master plan vision, bring the river to the city and the city to the river. So you should be able to see the river through the development site. You should be able to come out and experience the river, in these different corridors. Then let's see what else is here. So that's the bike path piece. Over here, we're keeping the eWeb Plaza fountain. That was a really exciting, people love that plaza. They really didn't want to get rid of it. And we did propose some other things because we were proposing water feature over here, and people were like, no, save it. So we were certainly heard that. Here, there's an existing, the existing Ewa Plaza kind of reaches down closest to the river, and we are not planning on going below ordinary high water for a number of reasons, but we did receive we heard so much about people wanting to touch the river in this area, and it's hard to do because it's the outside bend, it's a very steep bank, and really where we want folks to touch the river down the road is likely over here at Alton Baker. But we did receive a recommendation from our fluvial geomorphologists, Interfluve, who, recommended, hey, you could put some piers above ordinary high water here and create a little bit of a tuck-in for canoes or kayaks to create a pullout here, and maybe they can come up and have lunch and then go along their way. So tried to heed that call without a lot of intervention. And then I think the last piece, although this is one of my favorite pieces of the project, is really creating a very clear and direct way up to the DeFazio Bridge so you could get across the river. This area is a little bit of a no man's land right now. It's kind of behind the buildings, but before you get to Skinner Butte Park. And I really wanted to, we really wanted to create a clear way and kind of clean this up and make a very intentional landscape with some potentially some views out to the river. So excited about that as well. Oh, there it is. So, keep in mind also, I'm going to go back one more slide. Near number 10 there's the electrical tower. And this is a great reference spot, actually, for the next few images. You'll be able to kind of find where you are in landscape because of this tower. We are keeping that. It's not going anywhere, and it's kind of the base elevation for much of what we're doing. So we are laying back the banks. Oh, goodness. Laying back the bank here fairly significantly. And this is just, I think this is going to be a really lovely opportunity to revegetate the bank and create some habitat where now it's just riprap and weeds and not lovely. So this is an aerial view, so pretend you're in a drone or something. You would never, actually be able to do this, but I love this kind of imagery. So again, here's the tower. There's a viewing platform here, that independent pedestrian path, bike paths here, shared, decks, overlooks, main plaza, mound, and river playground and water feature. In this image, you'll see a little bit sort of some reference to some tents there or market plaza kinds of things. There's also a garden here that I didn't really talk about, but this I think has some really nice potential for views out to the river as well. And then I love these images because it kind of gets you down to the ground. So this is an image looking south toward the steam plant. There's the tower. You can see some of these shade structures that were part of the vision of this final concept. And then the bottom image is looking north toward the eWeb headquarters. And you can see that distinct separation of bike and pedestrian and overlook, and then the separate pedestrian path reaching out toward the river a little further. I love how open these images are. I think they're just such a distinct contrast from people's experience now, which is that you have a fence and a rail and this bank. And I just think there's enormous potential here to really be able to see the river also from pretty far away, see the surface of the water because we're pulling the bank back. You'll be able to see the surface of the water from a further distance. Right now you have to come up right to the edge of the bank. Okay, and that's all I have for the park.
So just to wrap up, there's a couple of motions that we're asking you to consider. There's an urban renewal agency motion, again, related to the affordable housing parcel. Really, we're looking for direction regarding further exploration of parking and additional affordable housing units on Lot 10A. And there's also a city council agenda item, which you would have to come out of urban renewal agency, and motion related to the step 2 of the local improvement district that Mark outlined.
That's great. Thank you very much. Very fun to see the pictures of the park. It's very exciting to look at. I have Mike in the queue. Anybody else with Claire? Okay. Take it away, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all of you for both the wonderful work on this and for the great presentation. I know that there's an awful lot of people working very hard to realize this, and I think, Emily, I'm not surprised at all, not in the least, that so many people came out and participated and feel deeply from all over town the stake in what happens here. I think that, as I have said for a very long time, I think that river is the central thing that unites an awful lot of people in this community. And it doesn't surprise me in the least that an awful lot of people from all over town have strong feelings about it. Would you put this back to the slide that has the numbers on the buildings?
Yes.
It's about halfway back, I guess. Something like that. Nope. One of the things that's, next one. Oh, other direction.
Do you want,
Keep going
you want
backward,
the park
please.
number or the building, the site development?
One more.
This one.
There we
This
go.
one? Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What you see there in the top right, there is a big empty white space there, but it's not. And so I have some questions about that as it pertains to how this is developing and what's going to happen next. It's not directly related to your presentation, but I think it's very much a part of the discussion. And so I'm glad to see Glenn here. I'm sure Catherine probably know this, but just in case, that's good to know that he's here. The eWeb's board, much like ours, has a website where they put out their tentative agenda. And in the November 6th eWeb board meeting, they have an action item, which is about 2 weeks from now. And that action item says disposition of headquarters building. Now, it's my understanding that they're going to, they may well vote on declaring that building surplus at that November 6th meeting. So my question is, would you please remind me of our option at that point when they declare that surplus and the timing of those options?
We have 30 days from the date of their declaration of surplus to request negotiations, and then 5 years to complete those negotiations.
And in that 5-year time, we could decide to do something, decide not to, whatever we decide to do. The initial 30-day one is just, yeah, we want to talk about it. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, and so if they choose to take action at their November board meeting, that may or may not be the official declaration. I think they have to actually send us something. But notwithstanding that, we do have our November 13th work session where we're talking about Town Square. What we would anticipate is getting council's input on whether or not you would like to exercise our option for further negotiation or not, because one option would be is we just say we don't have any interest in it, and therefore you can dispose of it anytime you want.
And we could alternatively say that talking about it is wise, and as the community may want us to have that discussion. I suppose I'm bringing that up as a way of notice, and no surprises to my colleagues that were he not to have said that, there's a fair to middling chance that I would have brought up a motion for us to act on that if they do, in fact, take that action on.
We will be bringing it to you for your discussion, for input on what you would like to do with that particular action.
Excellent, because if they sell it to a private company, that's going to have bearing on this project, and I think an awful lot of people in our community will care a great deal at that moment if we don't at least talk about it. Thank you.
Okay. Claire?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to go backwards through your presentation. Thank you very much for the update. Really excited about the park, really grateful to you staff and to all the public who gave input and put some really thoughtful energy into that concept. I think it hits all the marks in terms of pedestrian access, bikes, playground. I love the fact that we've added a water feature, which was something that I was worried was going to get lost. I understand why people love the eWeb water feature. I think it's great, and I'm glad there was a push to preserve it. The only thing I didn't like in all of that concept was those shade infrastructures, which just look out of place to me and don't seem to relate to the natural environment that is in the background there. So that's my only critique. There was a mention of infrastructure changes and natural gas infrastructure, and I'm just gonna, wave a little flag because we do have members of our community who are pushing us to limit expansion of natural gas infrastructure in our community, and so that may become a topic of interest. A little off topic, but it still looks like we're planning to just build a single restaurant on that site. And I've raised the concern before that it's a large site for a single owner restaurant, and we might, end up with a TGI Fridays or a Hard Rock Cafe, which is not what people have in mind there. So I know we're going to keep control of that site. Well, who's planning to actually build the building?
We're going to keep ownership of that, and we will offer the opportunity through a land lease, and Williams and Dame would like to be involved in that. We hope they're involved in that. We would work in partnership with them to bring forward a unique restaurant opportunity. It doesn't necessarily have to be one. We're just showing one building there just
Right.
for simplicity, but we've talked about desires for maybe more than one restaurant, and it's not a foregone conclusion that it'll only be one.
Yeah. So, and I know you've dealt with our restaurant owners here in town, and, there's a synergy of having more than one place for people to choose from, and a single restaurant that then isn't successful would be a real problem. So I just want us to be really smart about how we approach that. Code amendments, what are the nature of the code amendments, and would they have implications beyond this site? So I know I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I'm just...
No, I don't think the code amendments would, because the EWeb Riverfront Master Plan has its own sub-district code, overlay code, I don't know
Okay.
the technical term. So it wouldn't have implications beyond the boundary of the Riverfront Master Plan. It's a little complicated, but the way the master plan was laid out, it has sub-districts. So, as you get closer to the river, for example, the height limits start to go down. You get further, they go up. When we started to kind of reconfigure the streets, what happens is you now have a street that maybe bisects a sub-district. So now you don't know quite which height limit applies because now you've segregated it out into two. So there's a lot of things like that. The Fifth Street extension is kind of divided some of the sub-districts, and we need to kind of reconfigure the current concept plan and codify it to where it makes sense is generally. So we're looking at things like height limits in those different areas. We've reconfigured the park. We have a large central plaza. We've exchanged that in effect for some of the other open space that were part of the original code. So those are kind of generally what we're talking about. It has to do with those districts and things like height limits and the open space and those types of things.
So very site-specific codes that apply to
very
this,
site-specific.
location, great. So I'm, just based on what you've shared about the change that you're seeking our direction on, I think getting additional affordable housing units on that site would definitely be positive, and additional parking. Can you remind us what the current parking numbers are imagined if we didn't make that change?
It was a combination of surface parking on site for each parcel and on-street parking. I don't recall that number.
So there wasn't a proposal for a parking structure?
There was no previous, every parcel generally was going to self-park itself, so the hotel would self-park, townhomes would self-park, the apartments would self-park, and they would be embedded. They wouldn't, or maybe some surface, but they wouldn't be underground. Underground is expensive. I think there's some limitations because you're near the river and the cost as well. I recall there being 200 and something on-street parking spaces that would kind of supplement the on-site parking, but every parcel kind of parks itself, so it doesn't really provide a whole lot of opportunity for other public parking, and that's what we're trying to get, maybe some additional public parking.
Yeah. And it would require some investment by the city to assist with creating that parking is what I...
If there's public parking, yes, we would assume there would be some cost sharing.
would make
We don't know exactly what that means because we haven't really designed it or costed it.
Well, I'm definitely supportive in exploring that further, so I would support the motion number 1.
I just have a question following on that same piece. So the addition of the extra 25 units of affordable housing, is that in height? Is that how we're getting that additional?
It could be a combination of height or width. We don't have that level of specificity at this point. I think really what we're asking for is direction to go explore it, and then when we explore it, we'd actually come back and answer some of those questions. I think we're talking about they're talking about maybe 6 floors of affordable housing, which some parking embedded underneath. But to get to 100 units, you're gonna have to, at some point, figure out how you're gonna park those extra residents and so forth on site, and there's some limitations.
Yeah, I guess my only concern is that next to the steam plant, which is sort of our iconic piece, and I'm a little worried about this very massive building next to it. So I guess we'll have that detail, assuming council
We would, yes.
decides to go forward, so we can decide if that works. Just a little worried that it's going to be this big barrier. Okay, any other counselors with questions, comments? Betty?
Yes, does the
Get there.
housing project depend on MUPTI? That is, will they not do it if they don't get MUPTI?
There's various housing products, as I would call them. The affordable housing isn't MUPTI.
No, I'm not talking about that.
Slurpee, the other, low-income housing. The apartments, the rental, for rent apartments, which on there would be 3A and 9A, would be eligible, and 2 as well, would be eligible for MUPTI because they're for rent apartments. The fee simple townhomes would not be eligible for the MUPTI.
They will be sold to people, right?
Yes.
Well, if the building depends on MUPTI, shouldn't we decide on that before we go further into making other decisions?
Well, as you recall, going through the last MUPTI, the application, we require quite a bit of information as far as design, pro formas, financing. They're not there yet, so they couldn't apply today. There's not enough information for council to make a decision. So it's going to take them to more time to design, figure out what's the unit configuration, all those kinds of things, actually have a pro forma before we could take action and determine whether they need the tax exemption.
But if they won't build it without MUPTI, we should know that before we approve all the other expenditures.
Well, they're their expenditures, not ours, so we do ask them
The
to do.
infrastructure is ours.
Oh, the infrastructure, I think
Part of it is.
what we're really asking the council today is to start the process of designing the infrastructure, and there is a cost for that. Their development is going to be contingent on our commitment to build that infrastructure, so they do go together. They really can't be separated.
I still think if they say they won't do it without MUPTI, then we should make a decision about whether we're willing to spend whatever we're spending to help them do it. Before this is a wild supposition, but suppose they do everything else and council votes against the MUPTI, then what happens?
Approval of MUPTI is a condition for them to purchase the property. So the answer to that, there are some items that are going to be precedent to, and I kind of walk through the code amendments, the MUPTI, the LID, the infrastructure. Those are all precursors to them purchasing the property. So the answer is if the MUPTI doesn't get approved, they're not purchasing the property.
So that information about public input on that in a year from now doesn't mean anything.
I think it all means a lot. The council approved the conditions of the sale, and so you voted on that, and one of those conditions of the sale has to do with a variety of items to include approval of MUPTI. At the time that MUPTI comes forward, if the council says yes, they go forward. If the council says no, then they can choose whether or not they want to purchase the property at that time. And so the council has approved the terms already, and so that's what you're seeing coming before you is the process to continue to move those terms through this process.
But what I'm saying is it's meaningless then to say that the public is going to have input on whether we grant MUPTI.
I don't think it's meaningless at all. There's always a MUPTI process that they still have to provide information. There's a third-party audit that goes through that. There's a the river guides as well as a MUPTI committee that would provide information. There'd be recommendations, there are required hearings, and all of those things will come before you as you make a final decision on to grant the MUPTI.
And Williams and Dame isn't obligated to purchase the property if the MUPTI isn't approved. They could still choose to do so, however. So I said that they wouldn't go forward, but it's possible that they could still go forward if they choose to do that. But at that point, they wouldn't be obligated to purchase the property under our agreement.
Okay, Alan?
Couple questions. Thanks for the presentation. So following up on the mayor's question about the view shed, so that affordable housing 10A is going to be 6 stories tall. Right behind it is the Northwest Credit Union in particular, and also the courthouse. And are we any discussion with them about view shed and issues around that? Because this is going to impact that, because they now are looking out over the river, I suspect, especially from the upper floors of the bank building.
Yeah, what we have had conversations with them about height limits on this parcel as well as other parcels, and our desire to really want to actually see that, to have actually a design and elevation to kind of figure out where the view corridors are. It's hard to react to a height unless you can actually see it and look at the view corridors and all those things. And that is something that we would definitely want to work with them on if we choose to keep moving forward on not only on this parcel, but on some of the other parcels as well. As we're talking about code amendments and height limits and all of those kinds of things, I think it would be very helpful for us to be able to see those so that we can understand what the impacts of going certain heights.
Right, because 9A and 7 also could potentially impact depending on how high they are.
Yes. Yeah. And those aren't buildings, those are parcels. So what you see there is just the outline of the parcel, and where you put the building and all that, could go on those parcels. And it does matter where you put them and as relative to view corridors and so forth.
This map also says on 7, hotel or multifamily housing. Is that new? I remember that being a hotel. I didn't remember the or multifamily housing.
It's always been part of their presentation to us. We started with hotel or multifamily housing. I think in our early conversations with council, they really, based on our input, really emphasized the hotel. We thought the mix of uses was maybe a better outcome for the riverfront, but we don't know where the market's going to go hotel-wise or housing-wise, so having some flexibility in what is brought forward, I think, is really what they're looking for. There's, talk about other hotels, Obi's building a hotel, and so we don't quite know where the market will go, so I think some flexibility in that regard is important to them.
Following up on Councilor Taylor's question about the MUPTI, does the MUPTI apply to the townhome housing as well?
Not if it's fee simple ownership.
That'd
No.
be ownership.
Yeah.
So it potentially could be 9A, 7, and 3A,
And 2.
and 1 or 2.
If 7 is multifamily housing,
Yeah, potentially.
potentially,
And
yes.
3 and 2, 3A and 2 potentially as well.
Correct.
So that'd be the extent of the
Yes.
MUPTI would be potentially on those 4 sites.
Multifamily housing and condos would actually be eligible. The Tate was, I think, our only condo project that got MUPTI tax exemption as well, but townhomes would not be. Not in this current concept plan, yeah.
Last question is, so the second part of this meeting is about the LID, and so overall infrastructure cost approximately $15.5 million, and so the motion to move forward kicks in the design process to get to the design for electricity, water, sewer, natural gas, telecommunications, all those things, and the road infrastructure, and all that is pretty expensive stuff. And so the design part of that is about $1 million, which is in par with what my experiences in projects. That's actually pretty low. It's less than 10% of the total project cost in terms of design. So by doing this motion on the LID, that kicks that process into play and the $1 million into play
Yes.
to start spending that money, okay? And of course.
And we would have to come back for an appropriation on the $1 million, or, because they're not appropriating that $1 million today, or does it?
Well, currently, there's budget authority available within
Okay.
the urban renewal district.
Okay.
To
do that.
Right.
do that, right.
But it would get eventually rolled into the LID.
Correct.
And it would become part of that overall cost, and half of that would be covered by the Williams-Dame portion of it, because they're paying about 50% of this project cost, right? So it's really only $500,000 on the city's side for the design process anyway, eventually, if it all gets built out.
Right. Well, and to be clear, we're still negotiating that fee proposal with the consultant that was selected, so we don't know what that, it's going to be somewhere in that vicinity of $1 million, but we don't know, we don't have a firm number yet.
Right,
And that $15.5 million will get firmed up too, so that the next phase of the LID takes us through to the point where we're advertising a project for a construction bid. So we'll have a firm estimate of cost at that point, and we'll have a firm estimate of design costs in the next month or so.
okay, because that seemed a little low to me, less than 10% of the overall cost.
Right.
Is that,
Well, it doesn't include the construction management piece of it either, so it's more just getting the design complete.
and so the the LID ends up paying for that, but only if it gets built out. And the LID properties
Right.
end up paying for the infrastructure over time. So the risk is that we would spend $1 million and project doesn't, and we move forward on the design, but then the project falls apart, and then there's nothing built, and we would be stuck with the design cost. Is there a time where we would end up making the decision before that $1 million gets committed, or is it going to be, we have to take a little risk there?
You have to take a little, well, that's a big risk.
$500,000.
Right.
But
$1 million here, $1 million there.
if this project doesn't go forward and those eventually get developed, the LID would still be triggered at that point. So it doesn't go away. If this project goes away, the LID obligation is still there for whoever develops that in the future. So that's something to keep in mind.
You passed, okay. So I want to do a little time check. We have a motion, or do you need to comment before you do the
I
motion?
did want to actually make one comment,
Okay,
because it's really
okay,
germane
go
to
for
this,
it.
I
Very
think.
quickly.
And then I'll throw the motion
Okay,
out there when I
thank
get done. Just because I think what Betty was talking about was really important. I don't think it came out as clearly as, but if I understood what you were saying is, it's kind of a fait accompli that we're going to have a MUPTI here, and why don't we address that up front and decide whether or not that's something we want to do? And I agree with you. And the thing is, I think when looked at properly, the answer is yes, we should, as we have, include that. And the reason is because when we rewrote the public benefit pieces of the MUPTI, we did it very intentionally so that it would be a tool to create what I think is the most important public benefit. There's a lot of benefits that we tucked into the new ordinance, but the most important one is to end the day with a lot of new housing downtown that people that work for a living can afford to live in. I think that's the most important public benefit. And so when it costs more money to build somewhere, for example, the Bascom Village cost $187,000 a unit. So you can either charge a rents that recoup that money, but if it's intended to be low rent, then you need that subsidy, that public subsidy, in order for the rents to be affordable for that income level. And I think it's wise for us to build things down here that people that work for a living can afford to live in. I don't think the owner, whoever purchases that property, would have any difficulty filling apartments with residents that willing to pay all kinds of money to live in premier residence. But what we want at the end of the day is housing that people, average everyday folks in our community, can afford to live in. And I think that's the value of saying it's a good idea to put MUPD in as part of this, because the outcome will be housing that everybody can afford to live in part of this particular development. So I think it's a good idea for us to do it. Here's the motion.
Thank you.
I move to direct the agency director to explore options on expanding the number of affordable housing units and possible public parking, and bring back design options on anticipated costs and proposed public investments.
Second.
Any further discussion on this? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that passes. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to adjourn the meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency and reopen the City Council meeting, and we have a second motion here.
I move to order the local improvements to be made and direct the city engineer to prepare plans and specifications for the improvements and to call for bids on the construction contract.
Second.
Any further questions or comments on this? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that passes. So thank you very much. We appreciate that. And now we have half an hour to talk about, get an update on proposed temporary shelter.
I'll say a couple of comments up front and then turn it over to Christy and Becky. Homelessness is a complex issue, and we have a civic and moral responsibility to respond in thoughtful and caring ways towards those who find themselves in unsafe, unhealthy, and often desperate situations, while also ensuring the health and safety of all community members. We wrestle with finding solutions that compassionately support those who find themselves in untenable situations because of substance abuse, mental illness, poor choices, or circumstances beyond their control, without enabling or prolonging that untenable lifestyle. And at the same time, ensure that the livability of our neighborhoods, access to parks and recreation facilities, success of businesses, and a welcoming environment for all is maintained. Eugene has a long and rich history of individuals, organizations, and agencies laboring together to find a balanced solution that meets the daily needs of the unhoused community. The car camping program, rest stops, Dusk to Dawn, Opportunity and Emerald Villages, Operation 365, Community Court, Operation 600, Community-Oriented Response Team, Fuse, and 15th Night, to name some of the combined efforts of the county, the city, and others. Despite these and other efforts, we are continually challenged with concerns of homelessness, which becomes more acute as the weather changes. We are not alone as cities across the U.S. grapple with similar issues. I am encouraged by those who are on the front lines of this concern, but unfortunately, the public and nonprofit system is overloaded and the needs continue to grow. The preliminary results of the TAC report you received last week confirmed this need. Over the last several months, city staff have been engaged in looking for potential locations to pilot a temporary day access center and increase safe sleeping options for those experiencing homelessness. As staff considered various sites, we have kept in mind the emergent need to ensure more places for people to go this winter, knowing that council will also be making future decisions around longer-term options. The Dusk to Dawn program and a day center were recently discussed as part of the Community Safety Initiative, and funding for these programs are included as part of the $8.6 million one-time funding that council will take action on as part of the December supplemental budget. Last Wednesday, the City Council provided preliminary support for moving forward on a plan that could allow a portion of the vacant City Hall lot to serve as a temporary day center and overnight safe sleeping location for the unhoused. The recommendation to use the vacant City Hall lot was not in response to the camp that has formed on the Butterfly lot, but rather following weeks of careful and thoughtful consideration of a number of potential sites in the greater downtown. The county is the lead agency for addressing the challenges on the Butterfly lot, and we are actively supporting their efforts. We anticipate that many of those currently camped on the Butterfly lot will choose to access services provided as part of this pilot. The county remains a strong and constructive partner in this and many related issues. I know that not everybody supports the use of the City Hall block for this purpose. It is understandable and reasonable to expect that different people have different perspectives on how to address the complexities of homelessness and the impacts of siting this facility on this block. Our best outcome is to locate, operate, and maintain this facility in such a way to build trust and confidence in the broader community, the downtown community specifically, and those who are experiencing homelessness. Tonight, we will be asking your consideration of a motion to move forward on piloting a temporary day access center in Dusk to Dawn site on a portion of the City Hall block. And Becky and Christy are here to share more details.
I'll go ahead and turn it over to Becky.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. Last Wednesday, we committed to bringing back more information regarding what a temporary day access center and safe sleeping area on the City Hall blocks could look like. Tonight, we will talk about the purpose of the site, the services that we anticipate it will provide, as well as some proposed infrastructure. And then finally, we'll provide an opportunity for feedback and potentially take action on the city manager's recommended motion. As we've thought through about options for this topic, our goal was to provide safe and warm daytime and nighttime spaces for people experiencing homelessness, to reduce the impacts and vulnerability of people sleeping outside around the downtown area, and to provide a space where people can connect with the coordinated entry system, case management, and other service providers in the community. It's important to provide a temporary option as we address near-term needs. We're currently working with our service providers to determine the specifics of all that will be offered at the site. Our overarching goal is to ensure access to services, especially for those who may not engage in services otherwise. To that end, our thought is to provide a low-barrier, behavior-based service option with a focus on connection to services. Those services can look like homeless management system intake, coordinated entry, referrals to other services and programs, and case management for overnight guests. As we've discussed this option with our service providers, they've given us the feedback that we will probably need to be flexible and adjust the services that we're providing based on the people that choose to access the center. Our initial capacity for Dusk to Dawn safe sleeping will be around 38 initially, with a thought to potentially grow it. It will operate using the same rules and systems that we currently have in our other Dusk to Dawn sites. It will be on a lottery system, and we anticipate providing a light breakfast as well as case management for those that are using that system. In addition, we are piloting a drop-in day access center. We're looking at a heated temporary indoor space with an outside courtyard area. And the feedback that we've received from our service providers that it would be important to offer a designated smoking area for those that are accessing the services, so we will be including that. As we were developing the plans for the site, we were mindful of creating a temporary infrastructure that could be moved to other locations in the future. To that end, we're likely to utilize shipping containers for storage and services as part of the site, as well as our means to move the infrastructure to other locations. Right now, the site is modeled at the corner of 7th and Pearl, as you will see, but we're also exploring potentially at 7th and High Street. Starting at the top of the site, we'll be looking at including certainly restrooms and sanitation, as well as a day access tent that will be heated and provide welcoming seating, as well as Wi-Fi access and the opportunity for people to check messages and charge their phones. Outdoor courtyard areas, as you'll see, designated smoking areas, as well as the shipping containers in the middle, but could be at other parts of the site, will include ability for day storage, as well as access to services. We also thought it would be important to make sure that we have an open area for entry queuing so as not to impact pedestrian traffic on that site as well. The Dusk to Dawn sleeping area would be open at night only, and at this point in time, we're anticipating 3 large tents to accommodate. The other thing that we've thought about as part of this site is also being mindful of the privacy of those that would be utilizing the services, as well as the sight lines for those that are driving by. And so to that end, we're looking at some sort of privacy fencing, most likely an 8-foot fence that includes either privacy slats or some other option to provide some adequate screening. This would be the view from 8th Avenue. We will be using On the rest of the site, we anticipate that the county will be using that for parking. And so we wanted to make sure that that was available, continued for them as we do part of this. And then this would be the view from the parking lot from 8th Avenue in this scenario. These are just a couple of examples of what screening and lighting options could be provided. Again, we have other options that we would be exploring as well, but we wanted to provide a few visual examples to consider. Again, we recognize that this is just a temporary option and we'll continue to work with you to explore long-term options. This will get us through our colder, wetter months while we pursue a longer-term strategy with our community partners. So at this time, I'll open it up to discussion and questions.
Great. I thank you so much. It's really helpful to see a visual of how this is going to work. I have Mike already in the queue and Claire. So Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor, very much. I
Greg.
did see that. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
And Chris.
Thank you for the presentation. Number one, it seems to me as though this is, I was under the impression this was going to be run by a private organization, as has always been the case, but I didn't hear you mention who would be running this.
At this point in time, we've been talking with service providers. St. Vincent de Paul currently operates dusk to dawn as well as storage sites, so it's most likely we will work with them.
So you haven't made any sort of formal arrangements with anyone to run it?
We're still in the final process of locking that down.
Is it possible that the city would end up running it?
Not to my knowledge.
So it's dependent on us finding a service provider willing to operate it?
As Becky mentioned, we've been in ongoing conversation with St. Vincent de Paul. They have established a history of being able to have successful operations of these type of sites and are a willing partner. There are some things that they're working through within their staffing levels and things like that to get coordinated, but our intent is that at this point, that would be our provider.
I appreciate that. Again, I'm not asking whether or not they would do a good job, because if we did this, I think they would do a good job. My question is it dependent on an outside organization running it, or is it possible the city will run it?
We have no plans now to run it as a city organization. It's not really in our wheelhouse to do that.
I wish that was a little more Sherman-esque, but okay.
We're not planning on running a site, and so if there's
We're
no
not planning on
provider.
doing lots of things. but
Right,
yeah.
so if there's no provider to operate the site, our intent is not to run the site.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Number two, you said low barrier. Does that mean that there will be prohibitions on any kind of drug use or drinking, or not?
The definition of low barrier in this case would be that if somebody were under the influence when they came, as long as they met a behavioral model and rules of the site, then they would be welcome to the site, but no drinking or drug use at the site.
Okay. We didn't talk about budgets of any kind. Will city money be used to do the setup with the infrastructure you've just shown us?
So you might recall that some of the funds that we asked for as part of the $8.6 million for the community safety initiative included money for the day center. And we're also putting together the resources that we have available to run the dusk to dawn site too.
So the answer is yes, we will be funding part of this. Will the council be apprised of how much we're spending on this particular location?
Yes, I mean, we're the sponsor of the program, and so we will be spending the money for the infrastructure and the operations of it. As Becky mentioned, one of the things on the infrastructure portion, while this site is temporary, we want to be able to use that infrastructure in other places. So we're investing in infrastructure that is not essentially set up and tear down and throw away. So we are doing that.
Initially, years ago, when it was suggested by, I think, Councilor Poling that we do this on this site, he was told it could not happen because it was a construction site. And I'm assuming that has somehow definitionally changed?
Could either be definitionally changed or back when Councilor Poling was on the council, we were in a different place with respect to building the city hall on this particular block. And so that may be a part of what it was.
Okay. I appreciate very much the effort to try and do more than we are doing. I think what we are doing is not based on a good, solid policy or direction for council. I think this is another in a series of responses. And as you mentioned up front, I think it's a response and a reaction rather than a plan and an organized effort. Now, I know we're working on that. I do think this is a bad idea for us. I think after all the money we've spent downtown and all the money invested by private parties downtown, I think we're going to have a significant public backlash to this idea. Most of all, I'm sad that we're building yet another camp outdoors, and I don't think anybody should be sleeping outdoors in the winter. I don't think us enabling that to continue is a good idea. I think it's a bad idea, and I think we ought to be doing more to house people indoors. I think we should be building a public shelter. I've got a plan for one I've suggested at the table before, and I think I will look forward to us having more discussions about that because I think that's the right answer. Thank you.
Claire?
Thank you. Well, I like this site. I like the concept that you've laid out. I like the approach that you've taken to the pieces of the site that are necessary. I think it's taking into account a lot of the needs of the folks that we are hoping to provide temporary shelter to, and also the dynamics that involved in providing this kind of service. The one thing I didn't hear mentioned was an accommodation for people with pets.
Yes, we do intend to work to provide some kennel areas for pets, at least for the day area. It's still being discussed whether or not that could be provided for the overnight area.
And then I'm assuming it's a plan to accommodate both men and women.
Correct.
And what right now is creating the limitation of 38 to 38 people?
I think in working with our service providers and with St. Vincent de Paul, they'd like to start with that number, ensure that it's working and that they have a sense of all of the staffing that would be needed, and then potentially grow.
Okay. And I would like to see, the budget and what we anticipate spending and what that's going to look like. And I'm very pleased to see, an emphasis on, and I'm assuming this is in coordination with the Lane County Human Services, the homeless management system intake, the coordinated entry, and case management. Those are very important and may be an opportunity that folks coming to this site wouldn't have had otherwise if we weren't providing this location. And I really also appreciate the thinking about it being a modular facility that can be picked up and moved to another location when we are no longer in control of that site. We can't use it for that purpose anymore. And in thinking about the dynamics of the great investment that we've made in downtown and what we've tried to do, I think providing an alternative to people sleeping on the street, sleeping on the sidewalk, and the other things that create a lot of negative responses when people go downtown to conduct business. I think having that alternative nearby but not in the center of downtown, I think is actually a smart alternative. Obviously, we'll see how it plays out. I feel confident that you'll be able to get St. Vincent de Paul on board, and so I look forward to seeing this up and operating and some people taken off the street. Thank you.
Greg?
Well, I think Greg had.
Greg, and then you, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. How, in ballpark figure terms, how much will this cost the city over the life of this project? I know that we're planning to terminate it about, March or April, if we do institute it?
Yeah, our intent is also, as you might recall from last week, that we want to continue to look for a longer-term solution. And so definitely through that time period, but ideally, if there's something better that comes along before then, we would take advantage of looking at that side as well. And we have a team of people that will continue to do that work. The other thing that the budget piece is in we are in the process of building that budget. What we're trying to do is to provide the lowest cost options available to do this in a very quick, efficient way and use our resources in the best way possible. So I don't have a total dollar amount because we're working through it pretty rapidly right now to try to get the center up and running.
Have you identified a specific budget line item that would come out of, for instance, reserve for revenue shortfall, another, line item?
Well, as mentioned, some of that money will be officially approved by council during the supplemental budget 1 process for the day center, and then we'll be working on identifying resources for the Dusk to Dawn.
Would the county possibly be involved in I know their resources are limited because we give them money for, HSC, but would they be asked to participate financially?
We haven't had those kinds of discussions.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, they're still the lead agency for the butterfly lot and trying to work through that. And we will continue to encourage the county, and they have an interest, I think, in continuing to find other sites and other places for rest stops, for example, that people can participate in. And then as far as this particular site, we'd be happy for them to financially join us. I don't know if that's an expectation.
But is that a possible conversation?
We can have the conversation. We'd be happy to ask them, and if they would like to participate, we would welcome that financially.
Chris.
Thank you. This is, I think, a great idea. It's very responsive, and I think what it does is it kind of brings together 3 elements that are important to me in terms of outcomes. And the first one is we need to do something sooner rather than later. And I know when you're approaching a triage, you don't always have the best solutions in triage. It's the ones that are the most effective. Yeah, if I had all the time in the world, I could save that arm, but when I'm in triage in the battlefield, I have to cut it off. And that's not the choice you want, but you have to do something now. And while I don't think that this is as elegant a solution as we could have, I think it's the one that we can do now. And it's the one that responds now. But I want to do it in a way that also satisfies a couple of other interests. And one is that this be replicable. In other words, you talk about the portability of the units. I think if this model works, this becomes a model that you could look to replicate in other places, rather than take this one and just make it bigger. In my experience, when you're doing emergency shelter, you don't want to go above about 40 people per shelter. And so if you want to be able to accommodate more people, you create more of these. And so that puts an incredible obligation on this model to work. And that's why I really want this model to work. I want it to work in terms of our partner. I want it to work in terms of the financing. I want it to work in terms of how it's run and having no problems, and it ensures safety and stability. So there's a lot riding on this. And I think the design you've created really looks good and could work very well and could become a replicable model if you can scale it to where it can fit in a variety of different locations. So I know that according to the TAC report, this is not your ultimate end game, but it is something you can do now. And I think that's critically important, which leads me to my third point, the one that I think a lot of people will scratch their heads when I even bring this up and go, why is he even talking about this? But I think it's really important, and that is this must be visually attractive. If you make it ugly, you will never get anybody to support it, like it, or think it works. And so the drawing that you have, I think, should really emphasize that when you put this up, it has to scream well-managed, well-operated, well-maintained. That is the model that people will allow to be replicated in other areas. But if it's just more blue tarps and more ugly tents and more human feces and mess, who wants that in their area? But something that's well-maintained, well-managed, and attractive is something you can replicate. And I think the model you've created here looks like something that could do just that. So I know some folks, well, why does he give a care about attractive? I think attractive is surprisingly fundamental to whether these projects will work or not.
Thank you. Alan.
Yeah, thanks for this presentation and the quick work that you've taken to get to this point. I think this is a very good idea. In fact, I called for using the old City Hall building before it was torn down to house homeless folks, but didn't get much support for that idea. I think this is a good location, actually. It's available. It is, and I like what you've done here with this. It seems well-designed, well-organized. Screening is important. I agree with Chris that it needs to be attractive. It needs to be, when people look at it, they don't see something disheveled, disorganized, and I think it needs to be something that after a while, people won't notice it. And that should be the goal. And so I also like that it seems to be that you've got, it's going to be sanitary with the dumpster area and the restrooms. I didn't notice shower facilities.
No, there won't be shower facilities at
And
this
then
point in
can you
time.
put up the picture of the site plan? What's the thing in the middle of that day storage?
Yes.
Type stuff that we have down in certain, that we piloted, that works extremely well.
Correct. Yeah. There's two shipping containers, one in which we anticipate we would use for day storage, and another that we anticipate that if there's a need for service providers to meet with somebody privately, it could be used for that as well.
Okay. This, again, will be a low barrier, so, but there's no alcohol or drugs on site, and something we desperately need. We don't have anything like that right now. And St. Vincent de Paul has a great track record of doing this. They're doing it right now, actually, and they did it last year. They've got a great track record, great experience. I trust them. And I like that it's temporary, modular. It can be taken down. Expectation for time frame to get this built, and how long would it be there in the near term?
Yesterday to get it built, except for we're hoping to do it as soon as possible. We do need to get some electricity to the site and the fencing contractors in place and all of those pieces, but we are actively working to get it up as quickly as possible. And in terms of length of time, we don't have a final determination for that yet. I think our goal would be to contract with our service provider for a length of time, knowing that hopefully this location will work, but if we need to move it, then hopefully to be able to do that.
This looks like it can go up very quickly.
Yeah, it is. I think the thing, but we don't want to leave people the expectation it's going to be up next week. I mean, there are site things, so it's going to take a few weeks to get it up and going and operational and get everything in place. As several of you have commented, we want to do this right, and so we don't want to just throw it up and then not have that work well. And so we want to make sure we're urgent, but also appropriately timely.
Yeah, and, right, and but for this winter. And at
Yes,
least, and at
yes.
least through this winter for the contract. And it says initially 38 people. Is that for all 3 tents?
Correct. So each tent has capacity for potentially up to 18 to 20 people. But again, in working with our providers, they want to start it with a smaller number and then work up based on
Maximum capacity is.
about 60.
So to do the men and women, no children, but men and women, they could be in different tents, for instance. Or would they all be together?
I think they would operate based on the current dusk to dawn rules, but I would need to check on what those are specifically.
The rules
I
don't,
think they're separate.
the rules don't specify the location of how men and women can sleep in the tents. The only specification that's very clear within the dusk to dawn rules is that there can be no children also at that site. However, St. Vincent de Paul is currently managing the 99 rest stop regarding men and women is what we anticipate they'll do on that site.
And when do you expect us to see, when do you expect us to see a budget?
Probably within, go ahead. Probably within a couple of weeks. There's a couple of things, again, that need to be decided and negotiated, so.
Capital cost and operating.
Correct.
And that will be the basis of the contract for St. Vincent de Paul.
Correct.
And so far, negotiations or conversations with St. Vinny is going well, and your expectation is that they'll be able to pull this off and hire some people to work on this?
Correct. We've been engaging with a number of service providers related to options as we've thought about this over the last couple of months. And so, yes, those have gone well, and there may be opportunities for subcontracting with other service providers in the future.
I'm glad you said over the last couple of months, because this isn't something you guys pulled together in just a week or two. This is something that's been percolating for quite a long time. All right, and I would hope that St. Vinny would have some experienced people operating this as opposed to having newbies do it.
That is correct.
Okay.
Okay, I have 3 more counselors in the queue, so can I have a motion to extend the meeting for 10
So
minutes?
moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor of extending for 10 minutes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, excellent. All right, so now I have Mike, then Emily, then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to take off on something Chris said about us being assured of safety and, what was the other thing you said? Security. Can we be assured that this site and this location will be safe and secure for all those involved?
Yeah, I think what we rely on, for example, St. Vincent de Paul and their current site on 99, as far as I know, we have not received or responded to any number, or haven't responded to safety and security concerns particularly. And so we rely on their expertise to be able to also operate this site in that same way.
I'm asking this question because this is city-owned property at the moment. Seems like, well, it won't be before long, but it still is. And so my concern is around liability. And I wonder if you would speak to that, please. Are we liable? Should this be unsafe in some way? And I only bring that up as not that crazy of an idea. I mean, in a car camp in Alton Baker last year, a gal shot a guy and he's dead. So it's not unheard of. Do we have liability in this?
Well, no more, no less than we do on our rest stop sites, which are also on city property. So we have insurance, and we also have the dusk to dawn provisions, both in the code and in the rules, explicitly authorize the city manager to shut it down immediately if there is a risk determined to public health or public safety or any of those reasons. So the authority to shut it down immediately exists.
I had one other question and dang. Now I've forgotten it, so I guess that's gonna have to wait.
Emily.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this work. I appreciate the speed with which you've come back since last Wednesday, and I think it's a good, quick design. It looks clear and doable. I'd like to remind my colleague, Mike, that a tent's better than nothing, and I certainly would like to have houses for everybody in the city who would like one, but while we're getting ready to build those, I think a tent is a nice temporary solution. I also think the plan looks attractive, with the fencing and the trees and the same tents rather than a whole bunch of different tents. I think that's especially important because it is going to be downtown, and it's a chance for us to show everyone that this can be successful and safe and attractive. So I think you're doing a really great job. And we do have money in that bridge funding for a day center. So if this is one that can be moved around, it seems to me that, sure, we want to see how much, but it should be within that amount. The Dusk to Dawn money that we've already approved, will any of that go towards this, or is it all towards 99?
That was intended to go towards the program that we already had in place, so.
Okay. It could be a great model. I really like it. I appreciate my colleagues' comments. Most of my other questions have been addressed. I think the kennels are really important for the day, but I also, what are you going to do if you have a dog and you come in the day but not at night? So I'd love to see that also be available for the nighttime. Thank you so much, and I hope it goes smoothly and quickly. I know people are waiting for it. Thanks.
Greg.
What happens if demand exceeds our capacity? We just get basically overrun with people who want to have access to this site. Are there any plans in place to deal with that contingency?
So obviously the demand, we already know that there's a great need for the unhoused in our community. And so one of the things that we would anticipate is that there might be more need as there is at the current Dust to Dawn Center. And so that they have some strategies about how they manage that in a way that is respectful of all the people that are needing to access the services. So there's that. And then in addition, you heard Becky talk a little bit about some of the triage and the work that's going to happen on the front end to really understand what people's needs are. Again, thinking about this as a continuum of options that are moving forward for understanding where folks need to be. And so what we're hopeful for is that we'll be able to find alternatives that where there might be housing available that fit for some of the folks that might be needing house or shelter.
Okay, are we ready for a vote?
If
Oh,
I could
you
just
want
one
more
last, just
comment?
real
Go
quick,
for
because
it.
I
Yes.
remembered it.
All right.
I appreciate the manager mentioned this is not in direct response to what's taking place at the Butterfly Lot, but my questions are twofold. Number one, obviously, I don't think we could force people camping at the Butterfly Lot to go over and be in this. Isn't that correct?
Right now, the county would have to issue trespassing notice on that Butterfly Lot, and that's when it actually could be enforced. We wouldn't force somebody into a particular location. We can say, you're not able to be here for whatever particular reason, but here's an option for you to be over here. And that's
Currently, the county's not going to enforce on that site, and we're not planning to at some point soon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So technically speaking, for those that are not willing to fit into the model of behavior-based appropriate behavior, and or when that gets full, there's really nothing to stop people from camping at the Butterfly Lot because we're not going to enforce on that, right?
I think that would be a county decision on whether they would choose to trespass.
As part of the problem I have with this particular location, I think that it's unwise for us to continue with these options because we're not actually solving the problem. I think it's wiser for us to look at a public shelter, but I understand the urgency of it. And, you know, when it's cold and raining, some shelter's better than none. I get that. I don't think it's the right option for us as a policy body to be pursuing, but I certainly think this is the wrong location for this. And that's the reason I'm not in favor of this at all. I think it's a very bad idea because it's a bad location. It may be a decent option or better than the alternatives, but I don't believe this is the right place for it.
I will just turn this to you for a motion, but I'll just comment, we are not doing this instead of pursuing a public shelter. We're on the pathway to produce a public shelter. So this is an interim step, temporary step, an emergency step. Okay, please put the motion on the table.
Move to authorize the city manager to move forward with piloting a temporary day center in dusk to dawn on a portion of the city hall block.
Second.
Any further questions, comments? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Opposed? 1. Okay, thank you so much. Excellent. That's great. We're adjourned until 7:30.